Hello, so today I'm just going to be ranting about this one thing, and it's an interesting point, so here we go. So first, I just want to discuss what the triangle slave trade is. So basically, Europe would go to Africa, textiles, and goods, guns were traded with African kings for slaves, for African slaves. Then slaves were brought across the Atlantic Ocean, and then the slaves were sent to the Americas. So Jamaica, Cuba, 13 colonies, even some parts of Canada, right? So I don't know how nobody, at least to my knowledge, I've never seen anybody mention the Europe side part of it. I want to say this. Why is everyone demanding that the United States pay reparations for slavery? Now, slavery, according to here, African slavery, 1450 is when Europe started taking African Americans as captives and slaves for their trade with African kings. Now, that doesn't mean that it truly started in African slavery, it really got a foothold then, but that just means when Europe really just started to get slaves. Now, 1619 really is when slavery started to get more of a foothold. First captives to the Jamestown colony, beginning of slavery in America, but enslaved Africans, also according to this source, as early as the 1500s. So we're going to take a middle middle number here. Let's just say 1550. Alright, so the Civil War ended 1865, and since really this isn't entirely the most accurate number, but it's a fair estimate, 1550. So let's just do 1865 minus 1550. So 315 years is relatively how long slavery lasted in the US. And I would also like to point out too, now this builds up to a point, so hear me out. So that means slavery existed for 315 years in America. Now, when was America founded? Now, this may be a little bit of a controversial choice here. However, I'm going to go off when the Constitution was written, not when the Revolutionary War was ended, because technically they are demanding the government to pay. Some people are demanding to pay for the government to pay, and the government as it exists right now was formed when the Constitution was written. The Articles of Confederation, while it was still called the United States of America, was a completely different governmental system. It was a confederation rather than a federation. It was basically an entirely different government. So let's just say, when was the Constitution written? All right. So September 17th, 1787. So we're just gonna say 1787. All right. So Civil War ended 1865. So let's just go ahead and do 1865 minus 1787 equals 78 years. Now, I'd like to point out that slavery only existed for 78 years in the United States of America as it exists in its current state. Now, I'm going to be going back. So when did the Revolutionary War end? Revolutionary War ended in 1775. Now, our estimate for relatively when slavery started was 1550. All right. So let's say 1775. So 1775 minus 1550 equals 225 years. So for comparison's sake, let's just say, so that means that slavery existed with a foreign power in Europe, mostly by England, but some by French and Spanish states, for 225 years. And in that time, there was never even a thought of ending slavery. So just look at the numbers here. 78 years, approximately, is how long slavery existed in America before it was ended. 225 years was how long it was while Europeans, England, Spain, France, controlled and never even ended slavery. So I just want to say, why is nobody asking for reparations from Great Britain, who had it for far longer than the US ever had? Only 78 years. That's how long it took for America to end slavery. And I guarantee, if slavery didn't exist before Europeans, like if African slavery never happened, America wouldn't have created it. And now, obviously, there was some breathing room between when actually the Civil War ended and when slavery was fully abolished throughout the entirety of the United States. But that is not a number that can be placed. There's no specific number that you can use to determine when it actually stopped. That is not something I can calculate or anybody can calculate, because nobody's alive to really give a specific date, and that wasn't a date that nobody really cared about, because it's just nobody really cared about that specific date, because it probably never even happened. It was probably more of a long thing with some gray areas. There's not a specific date for that. But the best that I can do is when did the Civil War end? And I didn't even use when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, because that was actually signed before the Civil War ended. It was signed before the Civil War ended, and that I was going to use that number, but I realized that that's entirely unfair, because half the country was still kind of in slavery at the time. So that's obviously not a fair number to use. This is the best number that I can use for it. So this is just a point that I wanted to point out, is that within 78 years of becoming a country, like existing at all, within 78 years, slavery was abolished. And now, I also want to point out, I'm not going to do math for this exactly, just because, not any math, but I know the cotton gin was invented in 1794, and that's really what kind of sparked up slavery again. And now, most people don't know this, but when the Constitution was written, it was actually, the Founding Fathers actually planned on slavery just kind of resolving itself, stopping, because it was already on a sharp decline. Maybe not a sharp decline, but it was already on decline. However, the cotton gin sparked it up again. So, there was also about 20 years in between that when it was planned to just kind of go away. So it wasn't like when America was born, it was like, we're going to have slavery. We want slavery permanently. And in fact, really the only reason why slavery wasn't outlawed in America is because the people wanted the southern states to not get pissed about it. So that's most likely why. If that wasn't the case, there was probably could have maybe not had slavery after that, but that's besides the point, and that is something I can't prove, so I'm not going to argue that point. It's just some thinking room. So go over the numbers again. 225 years that slavery was controlled by a foreign power, UK, Spain, France. Those are pretty much the people that were there at the time. And 78 years before it was ended in America. Now, obviously, there was also, when the Jim Crow laws were written in the early 20th century, maybe more like pretty much early 20th century, that's a different law. Segregation is a totally different thing, but from what I can tell, BLM and organizations such as that are demanding reparations for slavery, not for segregation. So that's why I'm saying that. Oops, hit a key there. 225. You guys can still see that number, but this is something to point out. All right, and so I just want to point out this. Do I think reparations should have been given when slavery was abolished? Yes, but do I think that from America? No. And I also want to say out the moral issue with taxing a government that barely even existed for 80 years and then dissolved it, got rid of it. And the notion to get rid of it existed before it was actually existed. it just doesn't make sense why people are demanding reparations from a government that ended it far before, well, not far before. Yes, European countries did end slavery there then, before America, but they had it in their country for a ridiculous amount of time, 225 years, because they were making a lot of money off of it, until they lost a lot of their territory and countries started to revolt. And then they just went on to other places like Africa, India, places that were pretty brutally run by European powers. I just want to say that it's a little bit weird to... And I also just want to say this. Reparations should be given to a country who created something. Like, Germany was forced to pay reparations because they started... Well, they killed 6 million Jews. Germany, as a country, killed 6 million Jews. And while, yes, it was a different government, it was the same borders, and it was somebody took over it, so they had to pay reparations. I mean, they created it, they started it, they should pay for it. The United States was just left with it. The United States did not create slavery. Now, the United States did create segregation, but that was because because for whatever reason, this goes back to the whole democracy thing, give people the power to vote, they will vote wrong. Woodrow Wilson, I believe, was a World War I guy that made the Jim Crow laws and was also probably one of the worst presidents ever. So, you know, but America did create that, and that is up to debate if there was reparations needed for that, but so far I don't see anybody arguing for that. But mainly my point, America was left with it. They didn't create it, they didn't start it. It was just something that existed when they were created. It's not something they had any part in. It was mostly Britain's fault for bringing them over there. So if we think about it that way, it's a little bit weird why nobody's demanding reparations from the people who started it, started the trading, and started slavery, pretty much, in America, in the U.S. Or the U.S., North America, whatever. Or if you live anywhere else, rather than anywhere else other than the U.S., just America, because there's no North and South America and other places. But my point being, back to the numbers, 225 years is how long Great Britain had slavery, traded with slaves, started it, and continued to buy and sell slaves. And then 78 years was how long America had it before ending it. Just a point.